By the end of season 3, our queen and her heir were kind of having a bit of a hard time. Going into season 4 of the Crown series, there are two major things going on. One, the country's falling apart. Elizabeth doesn't know what to do about it, and we gotta get somebody in here to help fix it. Two, Prince Charles has one job to do, and he's not even doing it. He's supposed to get married, and he's supposed to produce an heir. That's kind of hard to do when you're obsessed with your ex-girlfriend, who's now a married woman, and hence never going to be marriage material. At this point, it's the late 70s, and Charles has had a series of relationships that all kind of fell apart. The girls either realized that Charles was still obsessed with Camilla and they bailed, or he bailed on them. He even proposed to one of them, and they said no. But now he's dating this girl named Sarah Spencer. Sarah Spencer is the daughter of the Earl Spencer, who's this big aristocrat. In fact, he's close friends with the royal family, so she seems like the perfect catch. More importantly, she is actually the older sister of Diana Spencer. So when Charles is visiting Sarah, he actually bumps into Diana Spencer for one of the first times. And she's dressed in this kind of funny costume. She's preparing for her role in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and she's dressed as a tree. But she still manages to totally charm the Prince of Wales. And if you can charm the Prince of Wales dressed as a tree, you're pretty much in. So when things don't work out between Sarah and Charles, Charles remembers Diana and he's like, maybe I should give it a go. What really throws him over the edge is a conversation he has with his uncle, Lord Mountbatten. Now, Lord Mountbatten had gotten a lot of crap from the royal family because apparently he was the one that originally encouraged Charles to hook up with Camilla in order to sow his royal oats. Now Lord Mountbatten is backtracking and he's telling Charles, you have to fulfill duty. You got to give up your obsession with Camilla. You have to move on and find somebody to, produce an heir. This causes a huge argument between the two of them and there's this big blowout. But shortly after this, Lord Mountbatten is killed in an explosion by a bomb planted by the IRA. Charles is distraught. Charles soon receives the last letter Mountbatten had sent to him. And in it, and restated how important it was that Charles find a suitable bride. He needs to fulfill his duty. He calls up Diana and he asks her out. And at first they totally hit it off. He invites her to the opera, they go out a few other times, and he ends up inviting her up to meet the royal family at Balmoral. Balmoral is the Queen's Scotland residence, and it's where she goes on vacation every summer. And every August, the royal family joins her. Charles invites Diana up to meet the family. And she has to pass what is called the Balmoral test. The Balmoral test is sort of kind of like a hazing process where you find out if you're in or not in with the royal family. Right away, Diana's a hit. She shows off her self-deprecating sense of humor, which the royal family loves. She talks about how much she loves the outdoors, and she also talks about how much she loves hunting. So Prince Philip, Elizabeth's husband, actually ends up inviting Diana out to hunt this stag that the royal family had been hunting all week and they'd been trying to catch. It would be like a major trophy for them. Of course, Diana catches the stag and she passes the Balmoral test with flying colors. Now, the prize for passing the Balmoral test in her case is that the royal family encourages Charles to propose. She's the one, there's nobody better. Shortly after all of this, everybody returns to London and Charles meets with Diana and proposes. And everybody's thrilled. So he has officially fulfilled his duty. Kind of. So now that we've solved the first problem from season 3, we gotta solve the other problem, which is that the country's fallen apart. Right at the beginning of the season, Margaret Thatcher is elected Prime Minister. Now, this is kind of amazing because now we have two strong women in power. They're only separated by a couple of months in age, so they're almost the same age. They both have a strong Christian faith. They're both very family-oriented. In fact, they both kind of wear the pants in their relationship. And they both have a strong sense of duty. In their first meeting together, they really hit it off. At first, they confide in one another that they both rarely get emotional in office. And also, Elizabeth successfully predicts the cabinet members that Thatcher chose to help her pull the country together. So Elizabeth's thrilled because now they're going to fix the country together. And even Thatcher's excited. She gets home and she tells her husband, I left thinking we will work very well together. So everything looks great. These two big problems from season 3 are fixed. Charles is fulfilling his sense of duty, his destiny to produce an heir, and Thatcher is stepping in to really help Elizabeth fix the country. Of course, this wasn't going to last because this is the crown. Charles's problems start even before they get married. It was during the engagement, because obviously Charles's idea of this marriage is totally different than Diana's. Diana thinks of it as a fairy tale, and Charles thinks of it more as duty. Right away, he just stashes his future princess at the palace. Doesn't answer her phone calls, and she's by herself. This really affects her mental health, and she starts to really spiral downwards. This is where she developed her eating disorder, bulimia. One of the first times that her bulimia comes up, she goes down to the kitchen, where we see a pumpkin on the counter. And it's very symbolic that her carriage has officially turned back into a pumpkin. It's midnight, fairy tale's over. Something else that happens is Diana quickly realizes that Charles is still into Camilla. She finds a sketch of a bracelet, and on the bracelet it says Fred and Gladys, which is Camilla and Charles's nicknames for each other. So she confronts Charles about this. And what Charles tells her is that this bracelet is a gift for Camilla as a souvenir of their relationship. Sort of like a farewell. And he's ready to commit to Diana. But we then have a shot on the day of the wedding, and a close-up on Charles's face where he solemnly lifts his head to duty as you hear this voiceover in the background where the Archbishop says, "This is where the fairy tale ends and the journey begins." So we know that this is kind of going to be a rough journey. And it really is right from the beginning, because Diana was never going to live up to what Charles wanted because she wasn't the person that he wanted to marry. Anytime Diana did something wrong, he would actually call Camilla and be like, "She's messing up. She's nothing like you." One of the first things they did together was when they went on a royal tour to Australia. And it really showed off their differences, because she had to live up to the relationship that Charles wanted, and she also had to live up to being a princess. And at this point, she was just exhausted. She had just given birth. She really just wanted to stay home with her son. And she was also suffering from her bulimia, so she was weak. Charles had no empathy for her. And even when she tried to step up in her role, he still didn't appreciate her. She ended up outshining him. She was charming. She was funny. She would make these little jokes behind Charles's back. And everybody loved that, because everybody loves to make fun of Charles. Of course, Charles didn't like that, because that's not who he wanted to marry. He wanted to marry a wallflower, somebody to just hang in the background where he could be the center of the show. Over the course of the next couple of years, Diana just falls apart even more, and she ends up feeling totally neglected and finding love elsewhere. So now, not only is Charles infatuated with Camilla, but Diana starts hooking up with other people. So they're really going separate ways. Somebody else who's also having a rough start is Margaret Thatcher. Her first couple of years in office, she's getting a lot of pushback. She makes all these changes and people are against it, and she causes a lot of problems. The biggest problem is that she makes budget cuts, which causes a lot of unemployment. And her fellow ministers do not like this, and they refer to her as inexperienced and immature, and maybe she shouldn't be in power. She then refers to them as upper-class bastards, and she feels totally slighted. But what really throws her over the edge is when she has to go spend the weekend with the royal family, and she sees just how much she can't stand these upper-class people. While she's there, she's put through the ringer, the Balmoral test, and she totally fails in so many ways. There's even a moment where Thatcher sneaks off to get work done because everybody else is just spending a weekend of leisure, and she actually has stuff to do. She is the prime minister after all. No. And she's trying to get things done when Princess Margaret comes in. And Princess Margaret's like, "What are you doing? Get up. You can't sit at Queen Victoria's desk." And so, of course, Thatcher jumps up and she's like, "I beg your pardon." And Princess Margaret has one of her famous comebacks. She always gets the best lines. She says, begging for anything is desperate. Begging for pardon is common." Now, a lot of other things happened over this weekend, but Thatcher just had it with upper-class poopiness. So she goes back to London and she ends up firing those upper-class bastards that were giving her a hard time. Now, this shocked everybody, but at least she was able to bring in some new ministers in order to unify her cabinet. What ended up bringing Charles and Diana closer together was a life-changing event. Charles and Diana were in Switzerland when Charles and his friend were caught in an avalanche, and everybody thought Charles had died, but he ended up being fine. But Charles's friend, unfortunately, did not make it. So, of course, this makes them really consider what their lives have become. Diana looks at the widow of the man who died, and she sees what her life would be without Charles. And she actually decides that she wants to make it work after all. So, to Charles, in front of his parents, she apologizes to him for all of the pain that she's caused him. And she reaffirms her vows to him. She says, I want to make it work. I will do whatever it takes, even if that means not hooking up with other people. But unfortunately, Charles has other plans. This near-death experience actually made him realize that he doesn't want to live a lie anymore, and he really wants to spend the rest of his life with Camilla. So he actually goes to Camilla and he says to her, I want to be with you. I want you to be my wife. But before I do anything, I need to know that you feel the same way about me. And she says, yes, I do share these feelings. This is enough for Charles, so he immediately tries to sabotage his marriage. The agreement that Charles and Diana made was that they can't bang anybody else. And so he's like, wait a minute, if I neglect Diana, she'll run into the arms of her ex-lover and I can get out of this. So he immediately stops answering her phone calls and he neglects her and he never sees her. And of course, this works. Now that she's broken the agreement she made in front of his parents, he can finally ask for a divorce. But of course, it's not going to be that easy because Mommy doesn't want him to get a divorce. It takes something else to really push him over the edge of trying to break away from Diana. That something happens when Diana goes on her first solo trip to New York. She knocks it out of the park. She's glamorous, she's hugging sick AIDS patients. She had done humanitarian work before, but never on this global stage, and it's all over the news. This news gets back to Camilla in England, and she totally freaks out. She's like, oh, wait a minute. If Charles leaves Diana, she's going to be seen as the wronged and the victimized. I do not want to be a part of this fairy tale. The only role I'm going to have in this fairy tale is as the villain. And she goes to Charles, and she tells him this. And she also reminds him that she is just the mistress. This is all she's ever going to be. And she brings up this little bit of trivia, this really interesting piece of royal trivia, just to prove her point. Turns out her great-grandmother, Alice Keppel, was also Charles's great-great-grandfather's mistress. And he stayed with his wife, the Queen, and Alice was just his mistress for the rest of his life. Camilla doesn't want this. But Charles says to Camilla, he loved her till the very end. Charles then tells Camilla one of the most princely things I think I've ever heard him say. And he says, let me take care of this. The thought of losing Camilla for real makes him even more determined to be with her. Somebody else struggling with responsibility is Margaret Thatcher. Everybody's getting frustrated with the unemployment. What brings this to everybody's attention is an incident where a man breaks into the palace. He's unemployed and his life's falling apart because of Thatcher's changes. So he breaks into the palace at 6 a.m. to tell Elizabeth all of this. And he's like, you gotta do something about this. And Elizabeth's like, what am I supposed to do? And really there was nothing she could do about it, but at least it brought to her attention just how frustrated everybody was getting with Margaret Thatcher. Elizabeth's own frustrations came out when she tried to impose sanctions on South Africa because South Africa still had the apartheid and they were trying to get rid of it. And Elizabeth really supported this. She didn't want this kind of racism happening in her Commonwealth. And Elizabeth and Thatcher had an agreement where she assumed that Thatcher was going to support Elizabeth's suggestions. Thatcher made a vocabulary switcheroo and kind of backtracked on her promise to Elizabeth, and it really embarrassed Elizabeth publicly. What Elizabeth ended up doing was she let a little bit of information slip to the public secretly, confirming that she didn't support Thatcher's moves. Now, she wasn't supposed to do this because Elizabeth's not supposed to be political at all. And it only made people hate Margaret Thatcher even more. What drove the nail in the coffin for Thatcher, though, was her longest-serving cabinet member and most loyal supporter, Sir Geoffrey Howe, resigned. But he didn't just resign, he actually tried to take everyone along with him. And so now her own party's turning against her. Thatcher, of course, is in denial about this. And then when her denial wore off, she begged people to stay and support her. And then when that didn't work, she actually went to the Queen herself and was like, let's just blow this whole operation out of the water. Let's just shut down government. Elizabeth gives her the hard truth. She says, listen, the country's against you, your party's against you, everything's splitting apart. Something that they don't cover in the series is the fact that if Thatcher tried to stay in power, she risks losing the election and the entire party would lose control over the House of Commons. But if Thatcher steps down, a Thatcher-friendly successor can take over and there will be kind of like a smooth transition. Elizabeth, trying to hold everything together, which is what she was supposed to do, what she had learned from season 3, makes it clear to Thatcher that it's best if she steps down. And Thatcher does. Elizabeth ends up saving the day, and she recognizes Thatcher's sacrifice. She awards her the Order of Merit, which is one of the highest honors you can get, and it's bestowed by the sovereign herself. So back to the Charles problem. After leaving Camilla and telling her that he was going to take care of everything, he goes to Diana and he actually just lets her have it. And he tries to break down her trip to just be this whole selfish act of self-advancement, trying to get her to just stop this whole thing. They get into a huge fight, obviously, and this really just provokes him to just go for it and really tell Diana how he truly feels, just totally throw his duty out the window. He says to Diana, "Camilla is where my loyalties lie. I relinquish all responsibility for this grotesque misalliance. If you ever feel unloved or unappreciated in this marriage, take it up with the people who arranged it." He makes it clear what this marriage was to him from the very beginning, which was just a sense of duty. So now Charles is free, Diana's free, but now Diana is in control of this whole storyline, and that's what leads us into season 5. But before we can do that, Diana has to spend Christmas with her in-laws, where they expectedly treat her like crap. She gets into this conversation with Philip, and Diana says, I just want out of this whole thing. And Philip tells her, foreshadowingly, that this might not end well for you. The very last scene is of this picture being taken of the royal family, and it really reminds me of the last scene from season 2, where it was like a cast photo. It was like saying goodbye to one cast and hello to the next. In this photo, Diana's off to the side, almost like she's already exiled herself. The last shot that's going to lead us into the next season is a close-up on Diana's face. She has tears in her eyes, she's lost, but she has a new sense of determination. Blackout. I wasn't able to cover everything from the season because a lot happened, but this should at least help us prepare for the next season, season 5. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this.